Arkansas at Georgia. Marco, what should bettors be thinking about?
The question here is, how good is Arkansas? They have not been tested yet. 2 cupcakes, number 12 ranking in the country. We're going to find out this week how good they are. And they've got a big game.
Slow down. We don't ask questions. We answer them. How good are they? What should bettors be looking at?
I'm looking at the game that Arkansas does have talent, and I think they are going to be a top 15 team at the end of the year. What concerns me the most about this game is, even though this is a big game, they're playing Georgia, it's on ESPN, they've got a monster game next week. It doesn't get any bigger. They're at home to Alabama next week.
Are they really? See, we have this debate all the time.
And we always will.
When there's a big game, you always say, well, this team's more motivated. I think at a certain point, you're as motivated as you can get. Now, you're talking about somehow that they're going to be looking ahead an ESPN game, Arkansas, Georgia. Those teams aren't going to be 100% focused?
They're going to be focused, RJ, but you got to understand that these kids are young kids, they're 20s. If they win this game, that's great. But they're thinking about knocking off the national champs next week. There's no question about it. You can't help, but when you've got the national champs on your schedule, a high-profile school like Alabama, and you have that game in your backyard, you're looking forward to that. I can tell you they've been looking forward to that game since they started spring practice.
All right. Interesting. Now, here's what jumps out at me. Is Georgia overrated? This team has only covered 4 of 16 games in conference. Most of us remember that game against Hawaii a few years ago in I think it was the Sugar Bowl. Just total domination. Next year they came top 3. Maybe they were number 1 in some polls. Big disappointment. Let's think about this. Over 16 games, you've got over 2 years of conference games that this team has. It's not 8 out of 16. It's not 9. It's not 4. They're winning 25% ATS or conference games. I think it was just a general Georgia. We talk about Notre Dame being marquee, talk about, Ohio State, USC, but there's a second tier of marqueeness, and sometimes it's regional marqueeness, and I think Georgia falls into that. I mean, all the way back to Vince Dooley and the 8 and Herschel Walker. I think his team's just slightly overrated, and in general, I look to fade them whenever I can. Do you agree with that?
I agree in theory with what you're saying, but what I'm going to point out, and I touched upon it in the Cincinnati video we did earlier, you're talking about a team, Georgia, that in the last few years have been extremely highly ranked. And with that comes larger point spreads. We're dealing with a game here like we did in Cincinnati where we're looking at basically pick the winner. We're not dealing with a point spread. So it's a little bit of a different handicap when you just have to win the game rather than win the game and carry that big number with it.
So you're saying that Georgia isn't built to blow teams out, but they're built to win close games?
It's just a mindset that a lot of coaches, their job is to win. Look at their straight up records in that.
I would make the case. You make a good point. I agree with you. You should profile coaches. We talk about Ohio State and how they're better in close games. They don't really blow teams out. Ohio State has that sweet spot against good teams. They don't blow out the bad teams. They don't do real well against the elite teams, but against good teams like Miami or Florida, which I was wrong. I actually, as the week progressed, I really leaned towards Miami in that game. That's how I profile Ohio State. They're good except against great teams or bad teams. They're good against the good teams. Georgia, I mean, they've underperformed both ATS and straight up against the polls. So I'm not sure I agree with you there, but I do agree with profiling the teams. Okay, one other point that I'm going to let you make your projection on the game. Arkansas can throw the ball. The scouts are saying this Arkansas quarterback's not so bad, better than average. Georgia has 3 new starters in the secondary. So I think at a matchup level, Arkansas's ability to pass might be an advantage for them. But let's hear your projection.
This, of all the videos we're doing this week, this was one of the toughest ones. I'm going to give the narrowest of edges to Georgia in this game, 24-20. I think we are getting a little bit of line value in the game because of Georgia's performance last week on TV. The public got to see them play South Carolina. They happened to be the noon game last Saturday. South Carolina just totally shut them down. They looked pathetic offensively. They scored 6 points. So I'm going to go ahead, look for them to bounce back at home and play into the fact that Arkansas does have that big game next week. If they are just looking just slightly ahead, I'm going to lean to Georgia here in a narrow 24-20.
Okay. Now, here's the thing, is most lines are correct. So I like when, to me, if you had a strong opinion on every game, as a viewer, I would really question what's going on. The odds maker's wrong every time. If anything, at least half, if not more, of the games should be within a point or two of the line, because that's why it's the line. These odds makers aren't dumb. No reason to feel bad about that. Avoiding a loser is better than winning a game because you're paying juice on the loser. So don't be shy to say, hey, the line's right. And even in those cases, we're giving the guys out there a chance to think about factors for their own handicap.
When I say value, to elaborate on that, had Georgia looked anywhere decent or won last week's game, they would have been over the field goal in this game. They would have been 3.5. Because of last week's performance, you got them under the field goal right now. Now, as the week progresses, that can change, but that's where I'm talking value-wise.
All right. Now it's your turn to continue the conversation in the comments section with Marco and me. And next up, we're talking Florida at Tennessee.